Hello and welcome back to another Django tutorial. So this is user authentication in Django. So Django comes with a user authentication system. It handles user accounts, groups, permissions, and cookie-based user sessions. In this tutorial, we look at how to develop and implement the default Django authentication, as well as looking at how to extend and customize it so that we can implement it within our blog project or indeed any other project. So this is a very lengthy tutorial, so by all means utilize the timeline in the description and just skip ahead to sections that you're interested in. I've tried to make it as modular as possible so you can drop into different sections or else utilize it as a reference point when you're developing your own authentication. So there's a number of different features that we're going to build in this tutorial. First of all, user registration. So we're going to extend user registration a little bit further to include email token confirmation so that the user will receive an email once they've registered and they would need to click on the link to confirm. Their account would then be activated. So obviously we'll build user logins and user logout. This is all comes with the Django user authentication system, and we'll have a look at extending that and adding a few different options, particularly looking at the front end form and how we can customize the form. So in addition to that, we also have password change so that the user can change their password if they've forgotten it, or else if they want to change their password once they've logged in, they can do that too. So in addition to that, once the user is logged in, they can also delete their account and they will also be able to change their profile. So they'll be editing their profile. So in addition to that, obviously we're going to need to protect some pages so that we know that when someone is logged in, we can then allow them access to different parts of the website. So we'll have a look at page authentication too. So a preview of what we're developing. If you're following the Building the Blog series, you can see that we've now moved to a very simple template. So up the top right here, you can see we have register and login. So these are the new facilities that we're developing. Register allows the user to create a new account. Once they've created an account, like I said, they'll be sent an email and they need to click on that to confirm. So all that facility we'll be developing in this tutorial. Subscribe to a newsletter. That isn't going to be developed within this tutorial, but we'll definitely look at this authentication system and add new elements to it later on in different tutorials. So users will be able to sign in. They will be presented with a dashboard, and from there they can edit their details and delete their account if they wish, and also change their password. So in addition to that, obviously they'll be able to log out. So in all, this represents a baseline for a simple authentication system using the Django user authentication system. So this is where we left the blog project in part 7. Part 7, we had a look at how to actually build an Ajax search suggestion facility. So if you want to start the project from this code, then by all means have a look at the description. There is a link in the description. That will take you to GitHub. You'll need to download the project and start the project. If you're not too sure how to download and start the project, have a look at this tutorial series. I've created a guide on how to actually get that started. So we don't have to actually do anything to activate Django authentication. Simply by making an initial migration and migrate of the database at the start of the project, create some simple tables that we can utilize to build upon when we're building an authentication system. So if we go back into our admin area of our project, you can see that when we do migrate our database initially, we have two new tables here, groups and users. Inside of users, we have some simple options. So this might not meet your exact requirements for your project. So for example, if you want to make a login system where you capture more information about a user, you're going to need to either extend or create a new model for that particular data, or you're going to potentially not use this database at all and create a completely new database. In a tutorial later, I'm going to go through how to extend the Django initial user database And then in a further video, we'll go ahead and actually create a completely new database for our users. So in this tutorial, we are going to just use the default settings or the default options in this table. So all we have available in this table, you can see here, username, email, first name and last name. So that's essentially all that we can store at the moment about the user. So as Django already has the tools and facilities for us to build upon, all we need to do is activate them in a very simplistic way. And we're just going to go over to the main project, which is the My Site URLs, and we're just going to add a new path. So here we're basically just going to hook in to the authentication space, and we're going to do that by creating a new path called account, and we're going to include the Django config of URLs. So this essentially creates 8 new URLs that we can utilize to start thinking about creating a login system for our application. So if we now go back into our application, for example, and just activate or go to accounts, for example, and login. That's not going to work. Let's just go for reg. So I just wanted to show you that you can now see that there are a number of different, or 8 URLs now available. So login, logout, password change, password reset, and so on. So we're going to be working with these initially to utilize these URLs, and then we're going to overwrite them because we want to create our own templates, and particularly we want to potentially extend some of the facilities that these offer. So for each option here, for each URL, behind the scenes, there is also a view. So the mechanics of actually checking the user name and password matches the database and so on. So that's all happening in a view, in an abstract way behind the scenes. So in actual fact, all we might need to do to build a really simplistic login system is just add some templates to some of these URLs, and everything else would just work. So let's just give you an example first of creating a simple kind of login view so that we can access login. So like I said, all we actually need to do, because everything is pre-built for us, is to create a template. So notice here that the templates by default, they're looking for a folder called registration, and inside of that a template called login. So we're just going to go ahead and do that first. So at the moment, our project is using templates inside of the application. So we're now going to move away from that, and we're going to create a template folder within our main project. So this is the key take home here, the fact that Django Authentication by default is looking for a folder called registration. So we can change that, of course. We don't have to use registration, and we will look at how we can do that later with some of the different templates. But let's just go back into our project, and now let's just remove or change the template system so that we aren't using app-based template folders. We're just going to have a new folder inside of our main project here, and we're going to call that templates. Okay, so inside of templates, we're going to create a new folder, and we're going to call that registration. So this is going to be the folder that's going to hold the templates for our authentication system. So let's just go ahead now and create a new file called login.html. And now let's just go back to our project. So that isn't going to work just yet. There's one final step that we need to do. So we need to head over to the settings of our project. So in this case, it's My Site and Settings. So this is the main project folder. Inside of here, we have an area called templates, and notice that the directory in my application hasn't been specified. So here you can actually define where you want your templates folder to reside. So in this case, we're going to use OS from Python, and we're basically going to join these two paths. So the base directory, so we're going to request the base directory from Django for our project, and then we're going to create a new folder, which we've already done, called templates. And now we define the fact that our template folder will be this folder right here. So when we go back now in our project and refresh, you can see that it still doesn't work. So let's work out why this is. So we've got that in place. I've spelled that wrong, that's why. So let's just rename that. Let's go back and refresh, and there we go. So the file that I just made earlier, called login here, is completely blank. So just to prove that that is that file there, and you can see it's working. So there was no need for us to actually create a URL here. We're just hooking onto the authentication system built in. So before we move on to the next stage, just to finish off the templates for this application, now we have a centralized template folder. We're now going to create a new section for the blog and also a new folder called base. So as you've probably seen from the other videos in this tutorial, we've been extending from a file called base. Base has all the HTML that we need, that we're going to utilize on every single page. Obviously, it just helps the fact that we don't have to keep writing all the HTML required for every single page. We can just reuse the one file and extend from it. So let's just go back into our project, and we're just going to create a new template folder for base, which is going to hold all the base templates for all the other files. And then in addition to that, we have a application here called blog, which is going to have some templates. So we'll create a new folder for that too. So this is what my base file looks like inside of the base folder. This is just the base HTML required for every single page or template. And you can see that I'm going to extend this template by adding the content of other pages inside of this block here. So I do have some styling here. This is just some global styling where I'm overriding Bootstrap, because you can see here I'm going to be utilizing the Bootstrap CSS. There isn't going to be too much CSS I'm going to be writing. I'm going to try and utilize all of the CSS from Bootstrap. So if you do see any classes, or if once we do go over certain classes, I will give you a general idea of what's happening, but I won't go through every single step of the Bootstrap code. So in addition to that, I've now made a footer file. So I'm going to have the base file, and then in addition to that, I'm going to create a footer file which I'm going to include on every page. I've created an individual footer page because you might want to change the footer on different pages. So later on, when we extend and add new modules to this project, we might want to use a customized footer page. So this is going to be the generic footer page for our application. So again, this code is just taken from Bootstrap. And then finally, we also do the same thing for the navigation. So here's the navigation file. So this is just going to include the navigation bar at the top. And you can see that I've added some items in it already, and I'll explain those as we go along. So here's some links to the login and register and so on. And again, I've created some styling for this page. This here is this is the CSS that's building the user profile circle that you see when they're logged in. So hopefully you can see the advantage now of having a footer and a navbar, because my login page doesn't actually use the footer and navbar, but it does use the base. So you can see here, first of all, I extend from the base. So I need to go back one file because I'm inside back one folder because I'm inside the registration folder. So I go back one, and now I'm inside of the templates folder, and then I move into the base folder. And inside the base folder is obviously the base file. So I'm extending from that, and the content that I'm going to have on this page is going to be inside of this block content. Okay, so now let's build the login.html page. So I'm just going to give you a demonstration of using the existing form, and then we're going to extend the login form. So we're going to build a new application called account, and then we're going to create a form and extend from there. So let's just remember that in the URLs we have an include, and we've included the URLs for the authentication system that's built into Django. So let's remember that those URLs are connected to views. So all the logic, background logic, has already been written through Django. So all we really need to do to create a simple login page is just create a new form, action, well, we're just going to send the action or the information to itself. And then we're going to use the method post to send that information. And we're just creating a form here. So we're just going to say form.asp. And then we're going to create a simple button with a type submit value login. So this represents the most simplest way of creating a login form. So now when I go back to my page, I refresh. If I try to log in now with my known user admin and sign in, I actually get this forbidden. Because one thing I wanted just to remind you that the CSRF token must be included on all your forms. As we're going to be building a number of different forms, that is definitely going to be needed. So if you do have that problem, it's really simple to overcome. All you need to do is add the CSRF token. So you can do that at the start or at the end of the form. And so when you go back now and try to submit again, everything should be absolutely fine. So it says page not found. So what's happening now is you can see that it's taken us to a page called accounts and profile. So obviously we've not built that yet, but that's the default path where Django takes you once you've actually logged in through this system. So that is slightly different, isn't it, to when you go to admin and you type in admin. Notice that I am actually logged in because I actually have to log out. So obviously that's different from if I log into the administration here, that takes me just to admin. So let's not get that mixed up. So let's just go back to accounts, login. So it takes us to accounts and profile. So I've gone ahead and added now some style and some other elements here just to build what you saw in the preview. So again, we're extending from the base, we're calling the title login, and now we have the block content. So the style goes inside of the content here. So of course you could add your own style page, etc. I'm adding it here just for reference now. In later tutorials, I will then just move that all to the CSS file. But for now, it's all here because I just wanted to show you and just make it more attainable so you know what CSS corresponds to what page. So this is very specific to this page. Notice that I'm using pics and photos to create the photo on the right hand side and the other logic here to create that on the right hand side. So we've got some form input CSS here. I'm just overriding some of the bootstrap form coloring. And then down here we have the container. So there's two parts of this container. You've got the right hand side here, which is this item here, and then the left hand side corresponds to this code here. And notice that they're both 6 and 6, so we're halving the page with these two elements here. So on the left hand side we have the form. So I've taken or we're going to add to the form in a minute because we're going to create a custom form here. But notice that everything is the same here. The action is taking it to the URL. I'll explain that in a minute, and that makes sense because we're just pointing it to the URL login. And then we're using the method post as per normal, and we got our CSRF token. So below the form, I've added some links here. You can change these links. These are just made up for now. So with that in place, let's go back to the page. And you can see that we've got some errors here because it says accounts is not a registered namespace. So what we're going to do next, in order for us to actually edit this form here, we're going to build a new application that's dedicated to the accounts and authentication of this project. So let's go ahead and open up the terminal and create our new application. Okay, so yeah, the next step is building the new account application. So just clarify why we're doing this and not utilizing maybe the main core application. By doing this, it allows us to create custom forms in a centralized place. It allows us to manage our authentication and accounts all in one place, essentially, within this application. So we can also extend the forms, or we're going to be extending the forms within this application and the authentication logic. Later on, we can also use this application in further tutorials to develop an account model, a new database just for the accounts. So I'll go ahead and just stop the server, Control C, and then let's create a new app. So we start an app called accounts. So that's going to create a new file here, folder as per normal. So this is our new account. So as per normal, we just need to go into our main project folder in our settings and just add this. Let's just add this project to our installed apps. Okay, so now we have that, we can then, in addition to that, also make a new URL file. Because we want to create some custom URLs. So add a new file called URLs. And then as per normal, just go into the My Sites folder and then go to URLs. And then from here, what we can do is just copy and paste this. So we want to have this above the Django config of URLs because Django is going to read this from top to bottom, and we want to overwrite some of these URLs. So to overwrite them, essentially, we're going to use the URLs in the accounts first before it gets down to the URLs inside of the Django system. So we utilize account for this, and then this is going to be accounts.urls, and the namespace we're going to include is accounts. Okay, so like we did in the blog URLs, we added an app name. So we'll just copy and paste this to make it nice and quick. So we'll go to accounts, URLs, copy that in, and then obviously this is going to be called accounts, so an app name accounts. And then at the moment, there's going to be nothing inside of here. Okay, so that finishes off that little section now. So what we want to do now is to create a custom form for our login. So to build a custom login form, a simple process, we're going to need to create a new form page in our accounts application, and then we're going to create our URL. So our URL is going to point to our new form. So we're literally just overwriting, or we're saying to Django that we want to use this custom form for the login. And then we need to then go into the the login page, and then update and build the form. So I've gone ahead and created the file forms in accounts, and you can see that I've added some code here. So first of all, I'm going to import forms as per normal. So secondly, this is something that you're going to need to read the manual to find out. We're essentially just overriding some of the existing code that exist in Django. As I said from the start, Django has this already built in. It's readily available for us. So we just want to extend. So the reason why we want to create these customized forms is, if you remember, when we output code inside of the template, so for example, the login here, all we have available is, we can't see it now, but all we had available is the form. We just say, no, I just output the form. Now we want to customize that because we're using Bootstrap here. We want to be able to include our own CSS and maybe our own classes so we can get things looking how we want them. So we don't want to touch the core functionality here. We simply just want to touch the CSS, the styling of our form. So that's essentially what I'm touching on here. So I'm not going to actually write any new logic, which is going to check the username and password against a database. That's still going to happen within Django by default. I just simply want to extend the form or overwrite the existing form so that I can include my own styling. So you can see here that I'm from Django config or forms, I'm importing authentication form. So this is referring to the login form. So I'll create a new class here, which I just call user login form, and I'm extending from the authentication form. You can see the bind or the match there. So what I need to do now is I'm going to define what I want in this form. So obviously what I want in this form is the username and password. So let's just go ahead and create that, but we're going to update the form to include the class and the other parameters, attributes we want to include so we can style our form. Sorry to harp on here. I just wanted to make sure you knew where we were coming from when I was actually going to write the next piece of code. So this can be a little bit of a contentious moment because there's so many different ways of doing this. Are there easier ways of doing it than I'm going to show you? Yes, most definitely. There are plugins which we can utilize to make things a little bit easier to do this. However, I wanted to use pure Django only. So previously on other tutorials, what we've done, we started off creating some meta and we used widgets. That was the first step of customizing our forms that I showed you. Then we kind of moved on and we were kind of updating and adding elements a little bit differently. And now we're going to do it slightly differently. So this is kind of the third way of adding attributes. So the third way is simply by when we actually define the field here for our form, we can actually just add the elements here too. So that's the next technique. So if you're wondering why I'm doing it this specific way, I just literally have just been showing you different ways of implementing the same thing here. So if we go back into forms, let's just now add our two fields. So these two fields are self-explanatory. Obviously, we need to make sure that the fields that are in the existing form actually exist here. Otherwise, this simply would be no point. So the login form just has a username and password. So here now we're going to be utilizing widgets and we're going to extend and add our own attributes. So that's just easily done. So here I'm going to add a class of form control. So this is a bootstrap class and MB3, so margin bottom 3. And then I add a placeholder of username and an ID of login username. And I can do the same thing again on password. I just add some attributes there. So this is just, like I said, another way of adding attributes. So now we need to add a URL. So to point the URL to our new form. So it utilizes our form. So to build the URL, I did leave some links at the top here in the forms.py. So definitely have a look at some of these pages in the Django documentation, because it gives you the background reading on why we're doing some of these things. But essentially all these settings I'm just taking from the documentation. I'm following the documentation. So in the URLs, so to utilize our form, obviously we're going to need to hook into our form as well as the authentication system. So we import the views, the auth views. So we're still utilizing, like I said, the authentication logic behind the scenes. We're not adding any views here. We're just using the existing view for the login. So we import that in. And then we go ahead and then import our form, which was called user login form. So now that form is available. So you can see here I've created a URL pattern for our path, our login. And I'm extending or utilizing the view from Django's authentication system. And what I'm going to do now is actually then go ahead and use the template. So I define template name, registration login. So that's a template I'm using for the login. And then I go ahead and say authentication form equals user login form. So obviously the user login form represents the form that we just created. And then the authentication form, I'm just going to say this represents the previous authentication form. So we're just saying that the authentication form that we want to use is going to be this. So we're just overriding the original user login form. Hopefully that makes sense. So now we've override the original authentication form, we can now go back into our HTML page and just spell out our form as we want it to look like on the page. So next up then, is the updating of the form on the login page. So again, this is just an example of what you can do, just utilizing some of the features within Django. Like I said previously, there are plugins, etc., that you can utilize to make this process a little bit easier to do. But I want to utilize Django as much as possible. So let's head back in now to the code for our login page. So I've gone ahead and created this. So we're just using the code that you saw earlier that I briefly explained, except for we didn't have anything inside the form. So now we have something inside the form. So again, we start off with the CSRF token. So we add that in first, and then I've added just this p tag here, which can just say sign in. So that's just the title. Okay, so here is the first item. So if form errors. So previously we had form p, etc. So we can access a number of different facilities through form, and one of them is errors. So if a user makes a mistake, a signal is sent back to the template, and we can capture that signal, these errors, and we can display a message. So this div here, this element, represents a bootstrap alert piece of code which is going to create a block with a color, and inside of that it's just going to say error username or password not correct. Now you can extract individual errors from the form, and I think we do that in later forms, but here's just a blanket error, because I guess in some respects I don't want to tell the user that their username is incorrect or the password is incorrect. If, for example, someone's trying to hack this, I'm literally telling them that user exists, or I'm literally telling them that password exists. So, just a blanket error here seems okay. Of course, you can change and extend this to however you want. So this is just an example of using form error in an if statement there. So then I've gone ahead and created a label. So you can see here I've manually created a label. I've used some Bootstrap again, but this time I'm using form.username.label. So I'm going into the form, I'm finding username, and then I'm extracting out the label. And I'm going to then use that label right here inside the label. So that's how I'm utilizing and creating the label, an individual label. And then I'm going ahead and going into form and I'm extracting username. So this is just referring to the variables that we've set up here in the form. Notice that in the form here, we had username and password as two variables. So I'm just going into that variable and extracting information out of it. So let's go back to the code, which was our login page. So you can see how we can extract information out. So at the bottom here we had the button, and I've just styled the button utilizing Bootstrap again, and it's just the traditional submit, value login, and some words sign in. So underneath that I've just created a separate area here. This is something that you can include just to make it look a little bit more like a login, similar to this down here. Okay, so we've added some text now, so that should now be ready to have a look at. So let's go back into the page, and you can see, there we go. So let's just check to see if this works. So, excuse me, admin and admin. So that should be the username password, press sign in, and that should take me then to, the accounts and profile. So we now have a login page. So notice that I'm logged in, but I'm still able to get into the sign in page. There are a number of ways that we can do this. We could, for example, create the view for this, and then within the view we could define those parameters so that the user can't access this if they're already logged in. It just not needed. If they're logged in, they don't need to sign in potentially. So to overwrite that, or just to add a little bit of JavaScript here, I don't want the user who is logged in to be able to access the sign-in page. So if I just go back into my code, at the top here, I'm just going to add an if statement. So this is just an example also of some logic that you can apply. So request user is authenticated. So obviously if the user is authenticated, then this piece of code is going to run. So this is just a method of checking to see if a user is authenticated. Maybe it's that there's some other code in your templates that you want to run only if the user authenticated. So this is one way of doing that. And here you can see I've just used some JavaScript to send them to another page. In this case, the account profile page, which currently doesn't exist. I'm using this namespace here, accounts. So if you're wondering what that is, so remember when we created a URL, I created a namespace and then an app name. So if I go into the My Site URLs, I've added a namespace. So that can make it easier just to define what URL you're trying to look for or utilize. So that's why I'm using that namespace there, accounts profile. Obviously that doesn't exist just yet. So that's going to cause an error, but that's how I'm going to direct people. So if I just run that now and press refresh, I am logged in. So if I refresh, I'm taken to account. It says no match found because it doesn't exist yet. So that code is definitely working. So let's now move on to the next section. So now we have a login system. We're now going to go ahead and create the authentication page, or sorry, the profile page, which is going to be protected against unauthorized users. So that's the next step. So let's first create a new file inside of a folder. So let's create a new template folder for accounts. And then we're going to place a new file. Oh, sorry, I didn't create that properly. So let's create that as a new folder. And inside of accounts, we're going to have a new file called profile. So you can name this whatever you like, of course. So this is the page where the authenticated users will land on when they log in. So just very briefly then, so you can see we're extending again from the base, so reutilizing code. This time we also are using the footer, so utilizing or reutilizing this piece of code. And you can see here we created a simple container, and also including the navigation bar in this page. We've changed the title. So here you can see I created a simple section that's going to have the user dashboard and just some text. So now we go inside of the URLs for the profile. So we're going to import the views because we're going to create a small view for this profile because we want to ensure that only authenticated users can access this view. So we set out a new path for profile, and then we use view.profile, which we're just about to build, and give it a name of profile. So next up, we build the view for the profile page. So here you can see that we're importing login required. So this is going to protect this page so that only logged in users can access this URL or this template or this section of our application. So here again, we set out this method as profile, and we're just returning the template for this view. So let's go ahead now and test this. So we go back and just make sure the server's on. We go back into our page. So let's just go to account login, and notice that we're already logged in. So it just takes us to the user dashboard page. So let's just log out, see if we can log out. So let's go back in and notice that we're using part of the Django system here still. So we want to make sure we go to accounts login. So let's go to admin and log in, and notice that it takes us by default to accounts with an S /profile. So this is the default behavior of Django. So we want to overwrite this because we're using account and not accounts. So within the settings of our project, our main project, so my site settings at the bottom here, what we can do is we can actually define the login redirect. So now we have that in place. What we can do is, well, there's 3 parameters that we can define here. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first one is the login redirect URL. So accounts profile. So that will send me to the URL of the accounts profile URL. So in accounts, you can see here we're using profile /. So that's going to take me to account and not accounts, because you remember that accounts here, sorry, this may be getting complicated. In the URLs, we're using account for our accounts here and not accounts with an S. So now we have that in place. We can now go back and try that once more. Notice how it works. So we just need to log out again. So if we go to account and log in, so this time when we log in as admin, we should now be able to be directed to the user dashboard. So if you're following the code step by step, you may have noticed that it works, but I didn't include, because I removed the nav and the footer. The reason why I did that is because it will cause an error. Initially, when I showed you the navigation bar and the footer inside of the templates and then the base, I included all the elements, the final elements, and that included all the links. And of course, these links don't actually exist yet. So it's not going to work. So we need to just remove some of these links to get it working. So we don't have accounts register, so we can remove that. So I've removed some links there. So we're just a case of now following what it's asking. So I've removed those links and now you can see everything seems to be working. So we now have a login system and the dashboard. So let's just log out. We'll copy this link here just to show you the authentication on this page. So if I log out, I am actually logged out. So if I try to access the profile again and I'm logged out, you can see it just takes me to the sign-in page. So the reason why it takes me to the sign-in page is obviously we've set up the sign-in page. We define that in the settings, or we just define that if we go into the My Sites again and settings, we define the login URL as login and the logout URL as logout. Of course, we could change that if we wanted to. Okay, so you can see what's happening so far. We can log in, we can log out, we can access a protected page called Profile. Okay, so next up is registration. So here we're going to build upon the Django registration system and extend it to include email confirmation. So there's a few steps to this. We're going to need to obviously create a register form and a template, and then we're going to create a custom view, which has all the facilities with the email confirmation. So the general process, to give you an idea of what's happening, although it's fairly, maybe you're familiar with this already. So the registration process here is that the user completes the registration form, an email is sent to the user. The user then has to click on the link to confirm, and that takes them to a page where the account is then activated. And then the user can log in. So there's a few things here that we need to capture. So for example, maybe the account is already activated. So we need a way of capturing that, for example. So let's first go ahead and go in our templates. So we're going to create a new template, and I'm going to put that in the registration folder. So although it's part of the accounts, inside the accounts folder are essentially services or features that the user can interact with once they're logged in. Whereas registration is going to have templates that are part of the registration or connected to the registration somehow when the user isn't logged in, for example. So within the registration folder, we're going to create a new file here called register. So this file, as you imagine, is going to be very similar to the login. It's going to be a half and half view, and then we're going to have a template. So I'm going to copy and paste that in, and I'll just go through that very briefly. So like I said, it's very similar to the previous page we created for the login. We've got extending from the base. We're going to check to see if the user is authenticated again. So if they are authenticated, they're not going to need to register. So we assume that's the case, and we forward them to the login or the profile page. You can see we've got some styling here. Again, I'm using a different image for this on the right hand side. That can be removed. It's an old piece of code. And again, we override some of the bootstrap form. So here again, we've got the class for the container fluid. And then we've got two elements here. On the right hand side, we've got this element here. And this is the code for the left hand side. And we're using 6 and 6, so we're dividing the page into half. You can see here in the middle, we've got the form. Underneath, there's some links here that you might see inside or below this form. For example, if you already have an account, you'd want to go back to the login. And maybe a help center, you notice that just takes you to register at the moment. So that's something that you might want to develop. So now we have this template in place. Of course, all this code is available on GitHub, so you can look through it. So now that's in place, we're now going to create a new form for this, and then we'll go ahead and create some of the logic for the email. So first of all, we're going to, inside of this form, actually perform some validation. So again, this is just an example. There'll be opinions which suggest that maybe we should just utilize the views for completing validation. But here we're just going to show you an example of creating some validation within the form page here. So I'm going to need to utilize the user table for this. So first of all, we import that into the form. So let's go ahead and build this form. So it's probably worth saying that all these form inputs are just mirroring what is already existing. If I were just to generate the default registration form, these will be all the same forms or the same fields. So we're going to go ahead and create this. So class, I'm going to call this registration form, extending from the model form. And then we're going to create, first of all, username. So we're giving it a label and then a min length. So this is something you can change. For example, if you don't want your users in your system to have a username less than so many characters, here we can start defining that. And help text required. So this is going to be required. And then we have the email. So here we're going to use an emailed field. Again, we can define max length and so on. Here we got the first password. So the idea here is that the user is going to type in 2 passwords, one password, the original password, and then obviously they're going to confirm that password or repeat the password. And so we're going to need to create some logic to validate whether the passwords are both equal. So now we create some meta and we use the model and then we define the fields. So username, email and first name. So first of all, we're going to create this method here called clean username. So we're going to just basically check to see if the username already exists in the database. So although that doesn't really necessarily matter in your case, maybe you want the email to be unique. Maybe you're using an email system as the main login username. So here we're going to just check to make sure that the usernames are unique in our system. So you can see here that we utilize a filter here and we're just checking. So we're getting the username that the user's typed in, and then we're just checking it against the current database. And then we're going to just raise this error if an error occurs. So secondly, we're now going to check the password to make sure it's not equal. Sorry, we're going to make sure that the passwords that the users have typed in are equal. Remember that they have to type the password in twice. So if it doesn't match, we're just going to raise an error. And then last of all, we're going to just check to make sure that the email is unique. So this is just an example where, in this case, the username and email has to be unique. So again, we create the very simple filter here and check to see if the email equals email within the system. Because you remember, we've actually imported the model in, so we've got access to the model here. Okay, so then we just add some parameters here, and like we did before, but just using a different method here, we add some classes to the username, email, and password so we can get it to look how we want. So we just add some parameters there, and that adds the styling for this form. Okay, so now we need to go ahead in the views. So we're now going to create a new view, which overwrites some of the existing settings for account registration, which now includes an email functionality. So we don't have an email server here. So luckily Python has a facility which allows us to kind of simulate an email server, and we can capture the emails. So what we're going to do is just go into the settings of our project, and that's in the My Site. So, and at the bottom here, what we're going to do is just add a line of code, and that's going to allow, or essentially start a service that when we actually send an email or go through the process of registration within our system, we're going to capture that email, and so that we can actually use the link that's sent to that user to test the system. So inside of the settings, down at the bottom here, we're just going to add a line of code, which is the email backend, Django core mail backend, console email backend. So if you want to, you can read a little bit more about sending email in Django. If you head over to documentation in topics email, you can see here that Python provides a mail sending interface, and Django has a couple of small wrappers over that module, which provides a little bit more functionality that's specific to what you might want to achieve in Django. So let's now go back into the accounts and the view, and now let's build a view up so that we can send an email to the user once they've registered. So there's going to be a few modules that we're going to import. I'm going to start off with the fact that we are using the registration form. So first of all, we're going to import that into the view. So this is the basis or the baseline of what's happening here. Essentially, we're going to send our URL to this view here, so the account register. And first of all, we're just going to check to make sure that the request method is post. And if it is, then obviously we're going to create some logic, which is going to then create the email. And else, well, we're just going to send back the form. So every time someone visits this URL, essentially, we're going to check to make sure that if they have registered, if they have, then we're going to be sending a request method post. If they haven't registered or sent a post request, then we're just going to show them the registration form. Okay, so this is fairly straightforward. First of all, we're going to just check, we're just going to capture, the registration form information inside of this variable called register form. So we grab all the information from there and put it into this variable. So next up, we're just going to check to see, this is just going through the basic principles that you'll find on Django documentation. We're just going to check to see if the form is valid. So we're going to check all the data to begin with. And if it is valid, then obviously we're going to continue. So what we want to do next essentially is just save the data into the database. So we'll just go ahead and we're going to capture the information inside the user, and then we're going to set, this is the most important thing, we're going to set the user is active to false. So let me just show you some of these parameters. So if I log into the system here and go to users and admin, notice that we have some of these permissions here by default. So active, staff status, and super user status. So these are all some of the properties or fields that we can populate in the Django authentication databases. So what we're doing by default is when someone registers by default, we are not activating them, which basically means that they can't log in just yet. Then obviously what's going to happen, we're going to send them an email, they're going to click on that email, and then once we received that email link, once they've linked back to us via that email, we're then going to create another method which is going to activate that functionality right there. Obviously for that particular user. So we set the active is active to false, and then we then go ahead and save that data. So now that data is now saved to our database. So now we saved the user data, we now want to start to configure and set up the email we want to send to them. So we're going to set out some basic information here. We're going to get the current site information. So check out the documentation to read out what that does. And then we've got the subject. So we're going to have a subject for email, activate your account, for example. So we're just adding this data into some new variables. And then we're going to have the message information. Notice here that we're going to create a new template for the email. And then we're going to pass some data into it. So the user, the current site, and that's going to help me just construct a useful email that's going to say, oh, hello, their username. This is our email from the website.com, and so on. And in addition to that, we need to kind of set out and create a unique ID that identifies that particular user, because what we want to do is obviously capture when someone clicks on that link that sends them back to our site to authenticate them, to activate them, we're going to need to know what their user ID is or what user they are. So we're going to send out in this encode here their user primary key. So when they click on that link, we're going to be able to identify what user is actually trying to activate. So we set that out in these two lines here, and you can see we have this token here. So once we've completed that, we then set out some additional information. So user.email user, subject equals subject, message equals message. So you can see that we're just finishing off our email here, subject equals subject, and then the message equals message. And then we're going to return a HTTP response here saying registered successfully and activation sent. So this is just going to be a basic HTTP response. Maybe we could change that slightly. Maybe we could link them to a template which is a nice template that says, well done, you've registered, blah, blah, blah. But this is just a simple system that's just going to return a response to say, registered successfully and activation sent. Okay, so next up is building out the email HTML page. So this is the email that's going to be sent to the user. So here you can see it's going to say, hello user, username, and then please click below, please click the link below to activate your account. And this is going to be constructed by many different elements here. So notice that we're going to have a URL that they're going to click on, and that's going to take into account activate, which we're going to need to generate. And notice that we've got two things here. We've got the user ID and we've got this unique token. So that's the next thing that we're going to need to generate, the unique token. So that's the email completed. So let's now go ahead and create a token. So let's just go back in the views here and just understand this a little bit more. We're trying to construct a URL which the user can click on in their email, which uniquely identifies them and also identifies the fact that they are the person that has registered. So you can see here we have this UID which we pass to the email. We're trying to create this URL. So in order to use the user ID primary key, we use this URL safe base64 encode, which basically encodes a byte string to a base64 string for use in URLs. So all we're doing here really is just preparing the user primary key to be utilized in a URL. That's what's happening here. Okay, so this second line here, we're creating a token, and you may have noticed that in actual fact, we're actually going to create a new file and import that in. So we're going to call this function here, this method, to create a new unique token that's unique to that particular user that we can utilize to authenticate them and the fact that they have actually registered. So let's go ahead and now create the token. So we're going to build a separate page here. In accounts, we're going to create a new file here, and we're going to call token.py. Okay, so first of all, let's import the password reset token generator. So we're going to use this Django built-in class to generate a token so that we can create a account activation link. Okay, so next up we're going to need to import 6. So this is basically just a Python 2.3 version 2 and 3 compatibility library. So let's go ahead and just pip install 6. Okay, so with that in place, now let's generate our token. So it's worth pointing out that obviously we're going to send a token, a URL in an email to the user, and they're going to click on that link. Now we need to think about some parameters here. So it's worth noting that the default value for the password reset token is 7 days. So the user will have 7 days by default to click on that. Now some of you might choose that's a bit too long. Maybe you want it a day or 2 days. So that can be changed in the settings file. If you just read the Django documentation, you're looking for password _reset _timeout _days. And you're going to set that parameter, and you can change the password reset token default value for the length of time the token is valid. So being this is a simple blog build, you can see that this probably identifies, or probably the simplest way of creating a token. So you can see that we're going to call this function that we've just created. It's going to create our token. We've got this variable here. So if we go back into our views, we're now going to import the token in, all the code in, so we have that function available. And so down here, when we create our token, we're going to call that function, and that's going to create our token for us. So that then obviously gets ported onto our email here, our token, that then completes the URL that we're trying to construct. And obviously, like we now know, the user will click on that and they will then be able to activate their account. So just looking at our process here, then we sent them an email, they've clicked to confirm, and the account is now activated. So we now need to perform some sort of action to actually activate their account. So that's what we're going to do next. Actually, a change of plan, because we've now got that in place, I guess we should maybe just check to see if that is actually working. So let's just finish off the account registration by adding a URL. So here, obviously, what we need to do is create a new URL for register. So that should be pretty straightforward. So we got /register/, and obviously we're using the account register view. That's the view that we just created. So that's now in place. So let's just go ahead and see if this is working. Of course, it won't actually be working because I do apologize. We've got out of sync a little bit here, but we haven't actually finished off the register form. So if you remember previously, we have actually gone into the form. We've created all these elements for the form, and then we went off and created the view. So let's just first of all go back into the register page here, and let's just finish off this form for the registration. Okay, so in our form, we're going to start off with just a little bit of text here. So create an account, and it's free and only takes a minute. So just some simple text. And then I've created a block of code here, which essentially loops over and checks for different pieces of errors. Sorry, checks for different errors. So what this code does is it checks for errors. Now there might be multiple errors here in this registration form. So whereas before I gave you an example of just a blanket error and your own custom output, here we're actually going to utilize the alerts that we created in the form to actually output the error individually. And for each and every error that's occurred, there will be a separate block, a bootstrap kind of an alert block with the custom error inside. So that's what you're looking at right here. So we do that at the top of the form, and then we start adding our labels. So we've got the label for the username, and then the username, and of course the email that we want to capture, and then the password, and of course we get the user to repeat the password. So here we're just outputting that with some text underneath and so on. And then we have the newsletter option, radio button, which isn't actually connected to anything yet. It's just for aesthetics. And then we have the button. So this is just a simple button with register. Underneath that, I've got a line, and then I've just added some other items here just to make it look nice. So that's what basically makes up the registration form. So now that we've finished the form, I do apologize again because we've completely gone out of sync. There's just a few things that I've forgotten to add. I was just trying to write this out on the fly here. Let's just go back into forms in the accounts first. So let's remember that we're utilizing validation error. We're raising a validation error, so we need to import validation error inside of the forms. So that's what should be inside of the forms. So let's go back to the views again. So we've utilized a whole heap of different modules here. So we need to kind of import some of these in. So this is what I have at the top now of my views. So I've included redirect because we're bound to use that shortly. And then we've imported the login required, and then the HTTP response. To make a HTTP response, we utilize get current site. So we need to import that in. And then the encoding, we used force bytes. So we utilize and import that in. And the URL safe. And we're going to need to decode this as well as encode when the user clicks on the link. So we're going to encode that. So we've incorporated that in. Login required, and we had anyway return to string. we've incorporated in, and the form we had already, and account activation token we've imported in. So that was the final view there. So let's also not remember we need a return if you've not already done that. So return that. Now what's also important here is that thinking about the activation email, we included account activate, the actual link. So it's looking for placing that link in there. Now at the moment inside the URLs, that doesn't exist. So we need to actually add that in there so it can utilize that. So that was activate. So what we're going to need to do here is add that in. So we add the slug, which is a UI DB64, the slug token, and then that's views activate and name activate. So that's just going to actually then generate the URL or help support the URL creation right here. Okay, so with that in place, let's test this to see if it's working. But of course that won't work because we then need to actually create our active, view. So let's just remove that for now. We will add that shortly. And let's just go back into our email activation. Let's just remove this for now. Let's just see if we can actually get to this point. That's the most important thing. So let's just now go back into our registration form. And let's just try this again. Just want to get something registered. There we go. So it looks as though that's worked. We've now received the message, please check your email for account activation. So that's what was expected. So let's just go back in. Now you can see in the console here, we actually have the email. So we've captured the email. The email is being sent. Obviously we don't have the link yet, but that is all working great. So this is what the email would look like to the user. Of course, if you've missed this step, we set out the settings to capture the emails. So we added some code in the settings to capture the email because we don't have an email server. So that's all working well. So now we can go ahead and finish this off. So again, I apologize how we got out of sync here. It got a little bit bitty there. We have a few different problems, but that's code, I guess. So we've now sent the email, great. So now we need to just finish off so that the user can click to confirm, and then we're going to activate the account, and then the user can log in. So that's where we are. So now we're going to create the activation code so that the user can click on the activation link and activate their account. So let's first of all go back into the URLs. Just put that back. So this was the active URL that we generated, preparing to activate the user. And then we can just go back into the email and just add that back. So let's go back into the view now. So we were in templates there. Let's go back into the views and the accounts. And now we're going to add the active view. Okay, so here we go. So we've got active. We're going to pass in some of these attributes here, which we're getting from the URL. So if we go back into the URL, you can see here we're getting the slug UI DB64 and the token. So we're going to pass that into our view and try and capture that. And then we're going to try and capture the UID, decode that, and then try and capture the user ID. So those are the two things that we're going to need. So obviously we want the user ID so we know what account to activate. So once that's done, we want to move to the next step. But of course, we want to check to see if the user exists. So we've got this except here. So user does not exist and user then will equal none. So that will happen if we receive an error from the data that's being linked from. So if the data is incorrect in the email, from the URL link, then this is going to return an error. Of course, if everything is successful, then we can go ahead now and set the user active to true, and then we save. So we can actually force a login from the user, so we can attempt to log in, or else we can return and redirect to login. So essentially what we're trying to do here then is we log them in, we send them to login, and of course if you are logged in, remember we've got a piece of JavaScript which will take you to the profile page. So if they aren't logged in, then if there is a problem, obviously we're going to send them to the activation invalid page. So we're going to need to quickly build that. So let's just go ahead and in the templates, in the registration, let's create a new page called activation invalid. I'm just going to type in invalid there. You can build up that page. I'm not going to go ahead and do anything on that page. Maybe you want to style that. Feel free to do that. So that's all now in place. So let's just close all that. So now we should have all the tools in place, or the code in place to actually receive an email, and then we can use that email to actually then validate the user. If you weren't aware, I've just gone over to the admin and logged in the users. You can see all these users I've tried to activate. So we can go ahead and just delete some of these before we then create some new users again. So we can just delete bulk. Yes, I'm sure. So we just got the admin left. So now let's go ahead and see if we can register. Okay, I'm logged in, so I need to log out. So let me just go to account and register again. So let's go ahead and register. So we need 4 characters at a minimum. We need a valid email for this to work. And then we need a password. So it says at least 8 characters and 1 digit. That's just some text I've added. You can change the parameters here in the form. So I've added my details. I'm going to press register. So I've got please check your email for account activation. So here you could build up this page to maybe include a link to the login, or else you might not want to do that. You might want to just send them straight to the login and just forward that message to the login page, so it actually appears maybe above the login form. So now that's the case. So let's go back into our console so we can capture that. So here it says hello. Let's go down here. So this is the bottom. So this is the email that's just been sent to AAAA, and you can see here's a nice link. So I'm just going to use that link now back in my browser to register the account. Let's just before we do that, let me just show you. Yeah, let me just show you the admin area for that user. So the user has been registered. And if I go into AA, you can see that the active is not activated. So let's just create a new tab, and I'm going to paste that in. So as per normal, I do apologize yet again. Going too quickly, I haven't actually imported the user. So in my view, in the accounts, I'm going to import user and also login. Remember, we're trying to get them to log in afterwards. Once they've clicked on their email and gone to the URL, they will be logged in. So we will import from the auth the login, and from the models the user. So that's going to be handy to collect all the information. So login, and obviously we're utilizing user at many different times here to get the user details. So once we've done that, in actual fact, everything is now working. So upon trying the URL again, everything is absolutely great. And you can now see when I go into the admin, the user is now activated. So let me just do that one more time. You can skip this if you don't need to see this. So let's just test this one more time. So we go to accounts and then register. So we're going to register bees this time. So register BBB, you can register. That will then send me to this link here, which you can easily change. So I'll go down here. You can now see that I've got an email for BBB. So I'm going to use this link now to activate. So the user should be logged in, remember, and that's because we've asked them to be logged in right here in the view. And then we've also redirected them to the login page. Now, if you remember on the login page, like I said earlier, we have at the top here, if someone is logged in, if they are authenticated, then they're just going to be directed to profile. So let's go back into our browser and then just use the URL link from the email. And there we go. We're now logged in automatically as BBB into the user dashboard. Excellent. And of course we can log out. Okay, so that was really the bulk of this tutorial in terms of the complexity. The rest is fairly similar type of activities that we're going to perform. So we've now completed the registration process. Users can complete the registration form. An email is sent. User can click on it to confirm that they want to activate the account. We now activated the account and the user can log in. So before we forget, one thing you can do is if you just copy and paste a link in that's been sent via email and just change it slightly and go to that link, you can now see in addition to valid, we also have the invalid in place. And again, I haven't built this page. We created a new template called activation_invalid. If you remember in the views, we sent them to that page, the invalid page. So that's something you can definitely just easily build up or change where you want to send them simply by changing this link here. So let's just create the login out procedure. Now, the login out procedure for this system is going to be a simple one because we simply just want to, when someone logs out, get them sent to the login page again. I think that's a valid way of working. So let's go ahead now and just add that in. So we're going to create in the registration template. So in the templates registration, we're going to create a new file here, and this is going to be called logged.html. Okay, so inside of here, we're just going to add some JavaScript for now, and we're basically just going to send them to the login page. And that's as simple as that. So let's go ahead and just make sure that that works. So let's go into the account here. So let's just account login. So we'll just go ahead and log out. And there we go. We're sent to the login page. So that's all what's required for logging out. So now we move to the forgotten password reset, and you can see that there's 5 templates for this procedure. So the flow of this procedure is that we have a reset form. That's the password reset form, number 1. So the user will type in their email. So we're going to capture whether the email exists or not in the system, because I think by default it doesn't do that. So we're going to need to capture whether the actual email exists. Then a email will actually then be sent to the user, or that email that the user types in. And then the user will be sent to the reset done page. So once that's in place, the user will then obviously go to their email, click on the email link, and that would take them to the password reset confirm.html template. So from here, we'll have a simple form where the user will need to type in their password twice and reset their password. Once they've done that, they would then be taken to the password reset complete.html template. So what I'm going to do here with the reset complete template is that once they've reset the password, I'm just going to take them to the login page. So I'm going to use the JavaScript code I did previously just to take them to the login page. Of course, you might want to create some sort of display or indication that the password has been reset. Like I said, I'm just going to take them to the login page where they can log in. So I've already gone ahead and in the registration folder, template folder, I've created the 5 templates that we're going to need. So first up, number 1, we're going to create and edit the password reset form. So at this point, we're probably quite familiar with this form page here. So you can see that I've extended the import here to include the password reset form and from the Django forms. And up top here, I've created a new class called pwd reset form. And obviously I'm extending from password reset form there. And all I'm going to need here is an email. So the user only needs to type in an email, and that will then start the process of sending an email to the user and then so on. So you can see here, it's the same process. I've added the class form control, our bootstrap class, and margin bottom 3, and I've got a placeholder here of email and an ID just because of form email. So I've created a max length. It is a email field. So in addition to that, like I previously said, I want to check to see if the actual email exists or not in the system. So now I'll go ahead and create this method here called clean email. So I'm going to check to see if the email the user has typed in exists in my database. So I return that inside of this variable test, and I basically just check that variable if something exists or not. So if nothing is returned, then the error will appear on the screen. Unfortunately, we cannot find that email address. Now, whether you want to actually do this for real, there could be a security issue here because someone could find out what emails actually exist in your database. So you might not want to follow this. So this just really is for learning purposes. So you can see how you can maybe check the email, and maybe you want to do something else a little bit more secure. So that basically just tests to see if the email exists. So now we have that in place. We can now move over to the URL and just set up the URL. So in the URLs, we've got the password underscore reset path. And over here a little bit, you can see that we're using the template registration password reset form. That's what we're going to create next. And we obviously import the form, the password reset form. And you can see how that's connected. So that's now in place. So now we can go ahead and have a look at the template. So the template for the password reset form is really just a copy and paste of the other templates that we've seen before, a half and half template with an image on one side, and I've changed the ID of the image to include a different image. So down here again, we've got the template here for that. Remember, we've got the left-hand side here, which has got a column of 6, bootstrap 6, and obviously the other column is right here. So we've got the two columns, and inside the column we've got the form. So the form is slightly different in that we've got the action here to URL path reset using the method post, and we've got some other text here just to make it look a little bit more like a real form, and we've got the button. So now we just need to add the element. So there's only one element here, isn't there? That's the email. So that's the only input that we're going to include. So we just add some text, forgotten your password, email, etc. And then we create the error place. So here in actual fact, we're just going to output error please try again. And then the CSRF token. And then we got the label and then the form input. So now when we go to the view, the account password reset URL, you can see that everything is now in place, and we're going to type an email. So let's just type an email that isn't an email to begin with. And you can see it says, please try again. If I try and type an email that doesn't exist, again, we get please try again. So it's probably worth pointing out, you might be wondering why, for example, it says please try again and not the error that we set up in the form. Well, we do have the validation error that we can use, but of course we can output that if we want to, but I've kind of overridden that, haven't I? In the form here, I've just put a blanket error, please try again. So that's not specifically saying that the email does exist in the database at all, but it's kind of a generic error, just please try again. So that's the first stage complete. We've created the password reset form and the functionality for that. So now we need to deal with the reset email. So we're just going to create an email. we're going to rely on Django to actually send the email. So we're utilizing the pre-existing view for that within Django. So we're going to do that next. And then, like I said, that's going to take you to the reset done page. So we'll just add a little bit of styling there. So you may choose not to have this reset done page. Maybe you want to send them somewhere else, because ultimately they will have to go to their email and click on the link and then be taken back into the system. But I guess it is good to have some sort of confirmation that the actual reset is done successfully. Now, the reality is that in actual fact, you might want to just keep them on this page here. So just loop around to the reset form page, and a message will appear on it saying that the reset has been done. Please check your email. So you might not even want to use this page. So ultimately, there's many ways of handling this. We're just using the Django built-in tools. So here's the password reset email. So it's similar to what we've previously done when we created the email for the account activation. You can see here we're just following the documentation. We're going to need the protocol domain, and that's going to be slipped into there. And you can see that we're using the URL accounts password reset confirm. So that's in place. And then we have a token. So pwd reset confirm. So let's just go into our URLs. You can see that we don't actually have that in place at the moment. So this isn't going to work until we have that in place. So if we go back to our flow here, notice that the next stage is to actually build the password reset confirm, because we want to send them to that page where they actually then type in the new passwords that they want to use. So we're going to have to do that as well shortly. But for now, you can see that we've created this simple email. We get the username, hello username, please use the link below. And this is the email, what it will look like when it's sent to the user. So before we do this, we have to set up this URL. So we can't test it until we set up this URL. We can remove this and test to see if the email is working, but we can pretty sure that it will do because we're just using the Django built-in view. So let's go ahead now and complete the reset done template. Okay, so the password reset done template, like I said, it can just be any template you want really. Just tells the user the fact that they've reset or they've been sent an email where they can reset their password. So here I've just copied and pasted, looks like the login page. So I just need to change that to reset done. So I don't probably need that. So I've just copied that page again, and in the middle here it says reset your password. If you don't receive an email, make sure that you've entered the address you registered with, and they've got a sign-in option and help center option as well. So here I've removed the right-hand side, so this is just going to be a centered message here in the center of the page. So like I said, you can change this to your particular styling for your page or for your website. Okay, so now we've done the password reset form. We now have the email, and we've now got the done page. So now we need to move on to the password reset confirm. So this is where the user is going to type in their new password. So again, a similar process this time we're using from form set password form. So that's the important part there. And you can see that I've created a new class here, and we're using set password form. So we're just overriding the new password 1 and new password 2. So there's two inputs for this form. And you can see here I'm just adding the label and the attributes for them. So that's the form completed. Okay, so now we go back into the password reset confirm. You can see that I've copied and pasted. Probably need to change the title again. So I've copied and pasted from the login, and I've literally just changed the form. So again, we're using the half and half view, and this is the form right here. So you can see that I've added some of the differences. So change your password, use the form below. We've got the error again, capture, if we need that. And then we've got the two labels and inputs. So new password 1 and new password 2. And down here, we've got this unordered list where I just specify the details of the password, how it should be formed, and then we have the submit button. So that's pretty much all that's needed right there. So now we can move to the URL. So the URL for this page, the password reset confirm, is slightly different, and because we also need to include the UIDB64 and the token. So remember, we're generating a token for the user unique token so that they can be identified, so we know which user is trying to change their password. So we add that in to the URL to capture that, and you can see here we're using registration password reset confirm. So let's just remember the fact that we need to also include the form for this, and we just add a name as per normal. So that's what the path is going to look like for the password reset confirm. Okay, so heading back to the password reset form here, so now we're going to test again to see if we can achieve changing the password. So I type in an email, send an email, I'll get an error. So let's just type in an email that exists in this database. If I can remember one, see if we can find one. There we go. So we found an email that exists. It says reset your password. So remember that this page here is the reset done page. So now we can go back and have a look at our email. So if we go into the terminal here at the bottom, you can see that we've got AAA is trying to change their password. So we're going to follow this link here. This is the email that the user has sent. So we type that in, and now we're presented with the change your password. So we go ahead and change our password, press submit, and then that takes them to the sign in page. So just to confirm, the last page that we need to complete was the password reset complete. So when the user types in successfully a new password, they're sent to this password reset complete form. So like I think I said previously, all I've done here in that form is I've just sent them across back to the account's login page, and that's what you've just seen. So that works now successfully. So next up, we now have most of the tools that we need to get the user logged in and accessing the dashboard or the profile page here. So what we need to do next is now think about some of the items that the user can, or some of the features that the user can interact with once they've logged in. So we're going to extend this here to include a profile. So we're going to go ahead and allow the user to update their profile and see their profile information. So they'll be able to update some of the details there. So we're going to need to build a custom form and a custom view. And importantly, we're going to ensure that this view is protected. So because we're using the default Django users table here, there isn't too many things that we can update. So we're just going to include some of these features here: username, email, first name and last name. So that's pretty much all that we can really allow the user to edit at this point. So we go ahead and in our templates, we're going to add a new template in the accounts. At the moment, we just have profile. So we'll add a new called update, and we'll go ahead and just style that as we've done with the profile. So what you're going to see here is it's just a copy and paste of the profile page, but it also now includes a new form which we're now going to build. So at that point, you just need to head over to forms. We're going to create a new form for this user edit. So I'm going to call this user edit form, extending from model form. So we're just building a custom form here. So we've got first name, last name, and email. So those are the three parameters that we're going to allow the user to edit. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to check to see if the actual email exists. So if the user tries to actually change their email and it already exists with another user, that's where we're going to capture it right there. So you can see here I've used a mixture of different tools here to style some of these items here. Notice that we've included the model user. So we're working on the authentication model user. We imported that in earlier, so we can definitely do that there. So there we go. So that's going to be the form that we're going to use. First name, last name, and email. It's going to allow the user to update and then check to see if the email exists if they try to add an email that already exists. So now we can go ahead into the URLs. So we just need to make obviously a new URL for this. So this is going to be a really simple URL. I'll add it just underneath the profile here. This is just going to be for edit. So profile/edit, and then we're going to create a new view called edit. So of course we're using a different form here. So the first thing that we need to do is just add in the user edit form that we've just created. And then we can go ahead now and create our view. So you are going to need to be logged in to use this view. So again, we protect it via login required. And then we go ahead and create our new method here. I'm just going to call this edit. So that matches the URL that we created. And then we've got the if statement. So if we receive a post request from this edit, we're going to collect the user information and then check to see if it's valid. If it is valid, then we're going to try and save it. Simple as that. So if else, then we're just going to show the form. And then we just return the actual template, which is going to be called update, which we've got here, and then the user form data. So that's pretty much how it works. If there is data being sent, we save it or try to save it. If there isn't, then we just show them the form. Okay, so in the update template, you can see that we're going to be utilizing from the profile, and let's just move down, just check to see if we've got all the right information. So we've got the form, we're sending it via post. So we want to check for errors. So we do that right here. And then we go ahead and change our details. So you can see here we're using a few different forms: first name, last name, and email. And we've got the button here to save. And we then, underneath this, we're going to add the delete account section. So I've pre-written that. So there's going to be a button here where they can actually delete their account. So I just add that in by adding some text here. And then I've added a new URL here to accounts delete user that doesn't exist just yet. So for testing, I'm just going to remove that for now. So that pretty much makes up, we're just following the same flow again. We're using the template from previous file, and then we're just adding the form and the items within the form as we've been doing for the other pages. So let's test to see if this is now working. So we go to the account, profile, and edit. So I've logged in and I'm just going to refresh this page. Notice that some details appears. So that corresponds to this admin user. So first of all, I'm going to check to see if I can change the password to a@a.com. Sorry, the email address. I should receive an error because that exists. So we're trying to capture that, remember. So there is an error, so I can't save. So if I now just add some details in and change it to something that doesn't exist and press save, we now have details successfully updated. We check the database and you can see that we now have updated details. So everything is working as we expected. So the last step would be just to add the URL in the drop down. So if we go to the base and the nav menu, here we've got the logout facility. So we've got this list here. So we can just add a new list. And we're going to put the URL for the editing. So obviously we created the URL. I seem to be doing it wrong here because I don't need to add a new list item because we're just going to be utilizing this drop down here. So I can just add right there. So the drop down item, accounts, edit details. Just go back into your dashboard. We should now be able to just do it manually. So now I've got the edit details. Of course, now I do want to add a few more links. So one of them being a link to the dashboard, so I can actually just get back from the dashboard from, say, the edit page. So just add that right in there, refresh. And now I've got the dashboard edit details. So I can go back. So next up, we'll have a look at changing the user's password from within the actual dashboard. So Django provides us two URLs for changing the password if the user is logged in. We have password change form and password change done. So let's go ahead. It's the same process again. We'll create the form. We'll then create the URL, and then we go ahead and create the template. So head over to the forms. Now, what's different here, that when someone is logged in, obviously we don't want them to change a password if they're not the actual user. So the additional input field here will be the old password input field. So let's go ahead and I'll just copy and paste this in. So we've got the past, I've created a new method here, pwd change form. This is from the password change form, so we just need to add that in too. We'll do that up the top here. So add that in from the forms. So you can see we have old password, new password 1, and new underscore password 2. So you can see what's going to happen. The user is going to need to type in their old password and then new password twice. So I add in the labels again, the attributes and so on. So now we can go ahead. Once we've removed the trailing comma. So now we can go ahead and go to the URLs. So let's just add a new URL for this. So let's go ahead and add password change to the list of forms that we're importing into the URLs of our accounts. And you see here we've added a path called password change. Again, we're using a password change view. And that's from the auth views. So moving ahead, obviously we're going to be utilizing the template password change form. And we're using the new form we created called pwd change form. Okay, so that's the URL now in place. So I've decided not to use the accounts section for this, which goes against what I said while I was using the accounts area here for templates. So password change form. So again, we're utilizing the same kind of template as the other items in the accounts to make it look similar. But obviously we've now gone ahead and created our form. So again, similar process again, in that we've got the error at the top here. We've got a label here for the old password. We've then got this unordered list for some items that we're going to have, or some details about changing the password, sorry. And then we've gone ahead for a label and then form, new password 1, form, new password 2, and then we've got the submit. So we should now be able to go into the, let's go into the base and then the nav main, and let's just add a new URL for that. So that's going to be change password. So we'll put that down there. So that's change password. So let's now go back into our system and refresh. So we should have now changed password. And now you can see we've got the form in place where we can type in the old password and change the password to a new password, press submit, and that should change the password. So now let's add a facility where the user can delete themselves from the system. Now, what we're going to do here is not actually delete the user, but we're just going to disable them so that maybe your system requires some sort of additional management feature where you want to save some data about the user before you actually manually delete them, or you might set up some sort of task where you delete the user after so many days because you want to store that data and so on. So we need to think about data protection and so on. So let's create a delete option within our system. So we'll go ahead and first of all, in our accounts, we'll create a new file called delete.html. So that's the template in place. So I guess the template is just going to use the same template as we had before for the other items in our accounts. And then eventually we can then have some sort of item here where they can press the button and delete. So you can see that previously what we have, if we go to edit details, we're going to have a button here where the user can press delete first, and then they're going to confirm and have to press another button to actually delete their account. So let's go ahead in the edit form and just add this delete button. So within the update template, just below, we're just going to add a line, so HR, a line, then you can see we've added some more text, and then we've added a link here, which is a button to the accounts delete user, which we're going to need to create the URL for. So we'll just remove the URL for now, so we can just see it in place. So we've got this delete option now, so the user would press on this button and that would take them to the delete page that we're going to build, and then they have to press the button again to actually delete their account. So the actual URL for this is going to be fairly simple. So maybe underneath edit here, we're just going to add a new path, so profile delete, and then we're going to be utilizing the delete user view and give it a name of delete user. So let's go into the view now. So you can see in this view it's fairly straightforward. We have a new method here called delete user. We're obviously protecting this view, so only logged in users can access it. And we're looking for a post request. If we receive it, we're then going to get the user and then basically set the is active to false. So we're going to disable the account. We're not going to delete it. We're going to disable the account and then just save that information and then redirect them to the account's login page. Okay, so we then finish this. Just close everything. We then finish everything that we need in the delete template. I create a form here. We're going to send no information at all across in actual fact. You can see here we have in the form, so some text, are you sure you want to delete? And then a button that's just going to submit. And obviously that post request is going to be captured within our view. If it is a post request, then we're basically just going to collect from the request the user information and use that information to actually set their account to false or inactive to false, and therefore they won't be able to log back in. So let's just see this in action. Okay, so you can see here I have a user called AAA and they are currently active. So let's go ahead and log in as them. So I sign in and I go ahead to the edit details. Now I have the delete account. So I've hooked that up. So I can now press delete account. That would take me to the delete account page we've created. And now I can press on delete. And then I'm taken back to the sign in page. So if I just go back to here and refresh, obviously I need to log in. If I can remember the login, that is. There we go. So you can now see that AAA is now been deactivated. And just to confirm, in the update template in the accounts, I added the accounts delete user. And let's just remember that in the delete.html page, we have this as the complete view. And then actually in our views, remember that we're using the return redirect when we save the data to redirect the user back to the account login. Okay, so there we have a baseline system which we put into practice inside of our blog system, where we now have a login feature, a authentication feature for new users, which we can build upon. Of course, what we've done in this tutorial is we've utilized the Django built-in authentication tools. We've extended some of the forms, and like I said, we've basically just put things in place as we might want to if we were building an authentication system from scratch utilizing the Django built-in tools. Of course, this doesn't represent a authentication system which you would want to take live into a production website. There are many different credits here and elements to this system that you'd want to enhance and change, of course there is. and we'll be looking at how to add more features to this authentication system in later tutorials. But for now, there's a lot there to learn and to go through and to implement. You can see that the code is starting to get quite large. There's a lot more to manage now, and it's important that we try and put things in place and systems in place and work in a structured way. Of course, something that is missing from here, which I was going to cover in a previous tutorial, was testing. Properly testing the system. If you're going to build an authentication system, you'd want to probably test the system. Of course you would. Again, this is just for educational purposes and to develop your knowledge of utilizing Django. So we have covered all these items here: user registration, we've used email token confirmation. Now, I didn't go into too much detail with tokens, etc. I tried to give a kind of a baseline overview of what's happening. Of course, you can read into that a little bit more. No doubt we'll cover tokens again and security and so on later tutorials. Hopefully I gave you enough information there to get going. We obviously made a user login and logout system, a password change facility, or two password change facilities, one if you've not logged in, one if you are logged in, the forgotten password reset option, the user account deletion with different options potentially there, and the user profile editing. And of course that was structured or enabled by utilizing the page authentication system. So this type of tutorial, there's bound to be questions, and you'll try to extend items in here yourself, and there's going to be problems. So if there is problems to the base code that I've created, then please let me know and I'll try and edit and change that. If you are trying to change your own code and edit and you've got questions, it does make it very difficult for me to try and support if you don't provide a GitHub link. And even then, it is time consuming for me to try and support you. And I'll try and do my best to help with some of the problems. But of course, I can't always spend a massive amount of time supporting some of the problems that you have. So please go ahead and have a look at some of the online superb communities that are out there for Django and ask questions, as well as maybe leave comments, and eventually as we grow the community will be able to help and support you. Thank you for now. Hopefully you got to the end of this tutorial. If you have, very well done, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.